So welcome. May the 4th be with you. Has someone already done that one today? There you go, Claire. It's actually my son's 22nd birthday today. Yesterday, my twins turned 7. But if I keep listing birthdays of my kids, I'm not going to get through this, so let's just move forward. So I'm Eric Fulmer with Shotflow. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about this topic. I hope it's intriguing to you as to what in the world I'm going to be talking about. So the goal is make that interesting for you. So I think it's something that came up recently with a guy named Tim Gray, who may be here in the room, that we just hired recently. Tim was at Splashlight for some years, Ralph Lauren, IO Integration, Orange Logic. He's one of these weird unicorns that's been around the industry and actually done work in the studio, and he actually thinks kind of like a spreadsheet in his head. Okay. Gosh, I know everybody here. This is great. Anyway, Tim and I were talking as we brought him on board recently, and he came up with this concept of kind of what business are you in and how does your business work. And it was just a new way of thinking about this studio management problem and the struggles that come with it. And I hope that this will be kind of an insightful way to think about it. So when you say what business are you in, we can easily say like, I manage a studio. But what business are you in? It opens an interesting door, and I think the first answer that I would propose to this is that you are in a services business. So you operate a services business. Anyone remember service bureau as a term? Some old school folks around here? Okay. This idea that you serve clients. That's what you do, right? Clients come to you and they need content created, and you create the content, right? And you deliver it back to them, and hopefully they're happy with it. And that is a services business. And when you run a services business, it needs certain things. It needs certain expertise and certain capabilities and certain systems, certain processes, and all of that to run a services business. What's also interesting is you may be serving more than one brand client, particularly if you're an independent studio operation, or maybe you're part of a large multi-brand client like many of ours, in which you're serving many brands, sort of many masters. And interestingly enough, they're each different, of course, right? They're never the same day twice. But also they measure the work that they're asking you to do in buckets that are different than the way you produce it. So we call these Y buckets. So the Y bucket is the project, the campaign, the catalog, the whatever it might be, right? So they come to you and they actually want to know how many of these are done against the bucket that I think in, not how you do it. I really don't care how you get it done. What I care is you to tell me, like, are there 272 products in the current seasonal launch? How many of them are shot? That's their why as to why we're even doing this work. And you have to think about that why and measure in that why and talk in that why and communicate in that why, even though your job every day is to just go execute how to get it done. And so you live in those two worlds of why and how, and you have to somehow bring those worlds together and figure out how to, again, talk in their language and then go execute in your language of how. So you run a services business, but you could also argue that you actually run a logistics business. And you run a logistics business because you cannot do any of that work without physical things in the building. You have to get things to the building, right? Whatever those things are. Of course, they're samples. We all talk about that. Like, how do I get samples? You got to get people in the building, the right people in the building. You have to get many times like vendor supplied imagery. Think of that as a logistics problem. I have to get content that already exists. Do I have to shoot it now? Did someone already shoot it? Is this acceptable or not? Think of that like logistics. Everything that happens outside the building that has to touch it is the logistics side, right? Tracking shipments of samples. All of that stuff is the logistics part of the business. And without logistics, you fail and nothing will happen. You have a big empty studio. It's fantastic. It's beautiful in here. Can't get any work done. So you're actually running a logistics business would be the claim, you would think. That's true. But then you'd also say, once I get in the building, I'm actually running a warehouse business now because I got to know where everything is. So if I get in the building and now I don't know where it is, now what do we do, right? So it can be there, but if we can't get it here, if we can't get it to this set right now with that model where it actually fits, it sort of doesn't matter that it ever got here, because I can't get it to the right place. And think of, again, the warehouse part as gear, props, right? Make the right computer, the capture station is running the right capture one release and not the one that's not. And all of that is like a warehouse. You got to be able to pull things together, and people are part of that, and get them all in the same place at the same time. Okay, that is an inventory-driven business. And that's what you run inside the building. So that, you could argue I run a warehouse business. But you also basically operate a performance space. So I come from like improvisational theater when I was 20 years old. There's a lot of commonalities here. There's drama, there's the need for catering, there's who works well together. The dynamics of that stylist with that art director, with that photographer somehow creates magic. I don't know exactly how that happens, but there's like a sort of magic there that happens when you put these two people together. They're great individually, but ooh, that's not. So now you have to manage all of that part. It's all the soft parts, the people part, okay? The people are critical to everything. Again, you can have all the inventory in the world and all the samples and all the equipment, everything, no people that know how to work together, you're gonna fail. So you could say it's really closer to running a performance space. But you could also say you're really in the business of manufacturing things. You run a manufacturing line is essentially what you run. And for those of us that wished it would never come to this, but that's the business we're in, guys. We run a manufacturing line. It's nice to think it's all creative and all that, but to the earlier point Colleen is making, these are the numbers, this is what we're doing. But what are we doing? We're taking raw materials that are data, samples, and talent, and we are transforming them into assets. That's the manufacturing business you're in, okay? That's what it is. That's the raw materials input, that's the output. And again, if all the other stuff works, but we can't get this line rolling, and we can't get the assets out the back end of the door, then we're going to fail. So we could argue, running a manufacturing business. But you could also say we're really in a collaboration business because it's very soft. Like even if the asset comes off the line, if we don't like it, if it's not meeting the requirements of the client, if they don't like it as much, maybe it meets all the technical criteria, but it's not on brand, it's not really what we're looking for, it doesn't jazz up whoever, everyone's got an opinion at this party. So you have to, if the collaboration doesn't work, all the other parts can work, we fail anyway. So you could also say we really are ultimately running a collaboration business. But if the quality of your output doesn't hit, and I'm talking about literally like there's garbage in that never got fixed in retouch, right? And somehow we process these and the resolution's too low or whatever it might be, you've got to also be in that QA business, which means that content has to pass through a QA process. And you are operating a quality assurance business as well that has to be able to deliver whatever that quality that's set. So collaboratively, we think it's cool, but again, it doesn't hit the technical criteria. I have clients who are saying, we have to scan everything now to see if anybody happens to be making like a rude gesture before it goes onto our site, right? Those are the kind of things that ultimately, especially when you get into user-generated content and vendor-supplied content, you're scanning it, is it high enough resolution? That's the QA part of the business. That's a business that you run. And ultimately, you also run an analytics, a data analysis business, because if the numbers don't make sense and you can't make the numbers work and you can't tell me where we are against our KPIs and you can't measure things, then it really doesn't matter how all that other stuff works because I can't understand the data that says we're getting uplift or we're not, or we should be using video or we're not. You're in all these businesses. What's the point of outlining that? Why did I take you through that? Another way to think of it is you're the superintendent of 8 buildings. And each of those buildings is different and runs differently and needs different things and is built differently and has different HVAC systems and plumbing and everything else, okay? But they're all connected to each other because I need them all working, I need them all running. And of course, they're all on fire. That's the challenge, right? So that's where we are, I think, and honestly, I've been at this for 10 years. So this month is the 10-year anniversary since Brad and Christopher showed me a piece of software at the time that they were building. This was at OneCreate that was going to solve all these problems at the time. And I fell in love with it, and I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. That's 10 years this month. And I've talked to hundreds of brands and studios. I've visited them all, not them all. All the ones I visited are the same. Every one of you think you're behind. Nobody has this right yet. Nobody's got it right. It's very immature in the sense that, again, you ask Allie, who's a rock star, and you're like, oh, she's still on Google Sheets too. That made me feel better. It's just like, nobody's got this done. Now, why don't we all have it done? And here's the reason. Each of these 8 businesses you run, or 8 buildings you manage, or whatever framing, or 8 capabilities that you need to have, requires different data, processes, systems, and resources. They all have needs there that are different from each other. So no wonder you're overwhelmed. No wonder it's complicated. No wonder there's no magic bullet. No wonder we can't just solve it. Like, why doesn't Adobe just show up like Adobe Studio and I plug it in, right, and I turn it on, and it works? Because this level of complexity, this is just one way of thinking about it. But the benefit of thinking about it this way is you start to break down the differences between these capabilities, and you start to say, maybe we can attack one of these, because you can't frontal assault all 8 of them at the same time and fix this. There's just no way to get there. And I say this as someone who would love to sell you a tool that promises to do all of it. There's no tool that's a magic bullet for any of this. The tool, as we say, is the beginning, not the end of the process. You start putting tools in place, now you're going to be challenged again on all of these. The tool's like inside that systems part. But you have to fix process. And again, you have to get data and you have to have resources. And by the way, if you don't have people with expertise in all these 8 areas, this is why everyone's feeling like they're not an expert in things, because they're being asked to do things that cross way out of their area of comfort. Because this is all going on at the same time. These are not separate, right? They're all interdependent on each other. They're all connected together. So just another way of thinking about the problem, and I thought Tim had just a beautiful way of kind of breaking this apart. I'd never thought of it that way. Like, we're running 8 different freaking businesses here. It's no wonder that each of them is not where we want it to be. So some thoughts on just kind of how do we go from here, right? Again, that shouldn't be another session of this is hard. Yeah, okay, yeah, we get it. Okay, so now what are we going to do about it? So recognize the complexity, but don't let it paralyze you is the first point. And part of that is just saying and trying to explain to your partners in the business, it's just not that easy, guys. And maybe by explaining that there's 8 different businesses running under this roof and that each one has different requirements and capabilities and that we're struggling with them is a point that we can all agree on, right? People outside the studio, again, they think it's like, they think it's like some easy, you guys like just, you hang out till 10 o'clock at night because you just like being there. They don't understand the complexity, right? So this might be one way you can help explain that. Find the entry point, the bang for your buck. So another way to think about it is if you look at the negative, we've got all these fires burning. What fire's burning brightest, creating a lot of pain, that we actually have some capability to improve? Let's say we're just going to we're going to tamp it down. Can't put it the whole way out, but it's not going to be burning as bright. Where do we go in as an entry point? A lot of our clients start with, what's the word? Samples, right? You hear it constantly. If I can't find my samples, I can't get started, which again is a logistics part, and then there's what happens when it's in the building. It's a great place to start. But the moment if you just said, like, now we know where all samples are, now the fire moves, right? Now it changes to the next thing, right? And that's okay, but you attack it in a way, some people it's review approval, that's really the killer, right? It depends where you are. There's no easy answer here to what one of those 8 capabilities we are gonna attack first. But you're gonna have to go in with an entry point, you're gonna have to make some progress, and the classic moves here is, make some intermittent progress. And this is probably the most important bullet to take away from this if you take something out of here. Processes can be siloed, but data can't. So when we think of, let's take the logistics example. Not everybody needs to know the intricacies of how we get those boxes to the building, right? There's a whole process. Maybe we're chasing vendors, and then the vendor's telling us yes, but they don't really do it, and then we have to escalate it. And there's a whole process there of chasing, or maybe we're begging the warehouse to get it to us. Whatever the process is, or begging the merchant to give it to us, or whatever, that process can be siloed out to the people that touch it and deal with it, and we can go chase that down. And the retouchers don't necessarily care what that process is. But the day you silo the data of that process over here, and the retouchers are like, why am I retouching these 3 colorways and I don't have the other colorway and I can't retouch them all together? They need the visibility that we don't have the sample and why we don't. So the problem is the data, if we silo the data as well, we're in trouble again. And this is why you end up with 16 Google Sheets and people jumping around and tabs everywhere, is you can't have 800 columns that anybody can deal with if you think about it on a flat level. But what you have to do is there's this concept of a data lake that's been hot for years kind of in the IT world. If we're going to build this awesome data lake, your IT team will tell you it's going to be amazing. It's going to take them 10 years. It'll never get done. But in the meantime, this idea that data would be available outside of all these silos and we just kind of tap into it. Think of a data lake for the studio. in that you don't need all that data all the time. And again, you don't need to all be looking at it all at the same moment. But at any given time, the data about did we deliver it, did we not, is it approved or not, was it rejected or not on that individual asset, where are we in the campaign, again, logistically, do we not have a sample, is actually relevant to almost everybody on some level. They just want their own little lens on it, but that data can't be siloed. And this is where we run into the problems of we got data in 8 places, and you know the drill. I think this event is so important, and this is why we also did the co-sponsored the prior photo studio ops events that happened in LA and New York in the past. That we've built Photo Ops Fight Club, which is like a private little group where we talk about this stuff. We've tried to create this community of mentorship and consultation. Everyone here is realizing, because I've had everyone say it to me, oh my gosh, everybody has the exact same problems. You do have the exact same problems broadly. The details, the devil's in the details. It's different in every business. And Ali would talk about just jewelry is different than even apparel at Saks, than different than this. The devil's in the details, but the broad strokes are, samples are samples, and they're logistically, physically a thing, and we deal with them on racks and on tables and on carts. And there's certain things that are common. So just don't go it alone. Look for mentorship and consultation. Talk to people that have been there. This community is super important. And the bringing this community back physically is so important over the last 2 years of being siloed. You are running rogue in your own organization. You don't have the support that you need. You're going to have to find it outside. Again, no magic bullets. If I tell you there's a magic bullet, if someone else tells you a magic bullet, they either don't know what they're talking about, they just don't know, or they're just trying to sell you a bill of goods. You have to look at it incrementally. Again, you have to think about it in a long-term journey. Nobody wants to hear that. Colleen said it took 3 years to do this or that. No one wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. What they want to hear is, what do we get done by holiday this year, is what I want to hear. But that's going to be a piece, and then you're going to have to put another piece, and you have to put another piece on, and you're going to have to live through more holidays where things are not perfect, and that's the journey. So if you need to solve it in 6 weeks, find another area to work in, because this one ain't going down that way. There's no way to fix it that way. So play the long game, bank your small wins, and also again show results, right? So you make a little improvement, you gain a little bit of time, or people are doing more valuable work instead of crap work, and they're happier, and whatever that game is, however you play it, you're going to have to bank the quick wins and then use that as leverage to get the next $5 and the next person and the next whatever to go after the next thing. And that incremental nature is just, honestly, it's really hard for creatives to accept. And it's hard for us, because I have clients, potential clients come to us and be like, it's amazing, 6 weeks, can you just get it live and then we're done? And it's like, it just doesn't work that way, guys. So that's the bad news. The good news is that if we attack it in an order that makes sense, you can start to see a lot of change very quickly. So that's really all that I had to present today. I hope that was an interesting way of thinking about it, maybe gave you a little bit different perspective, and I hope all of you enjoy the rest of the day, and just glad to be all back together in the same place and seeing everybody, and hope we don't have another pandemic coming at us.